Okay, so yeah, just to kick things off, looking to see how and where we want to store policies. I pre-populated the agenda with just a few questions just to sort of seed the conversation. But other than that, I just wanted to kick it off and turn it over to the rest of the group here.
Arthur, I believe you started working on some of it. Do you have any initial thoughts? Because for me, I can start actually. I believe we should store them as YAML files, so the similar as we store things for Kubernetes. Then by design we have already history, who changed what, and that's a good thing actually to have it, and we can schedule a pipeline and we can run it. So we have all things that we already have in GitLab by default, and then we just need to build UI around it.
Yeah, I started kind of working, but I feel like the stuff I'm doing right now is might not be relevant for this particular discussion because I'm doing things specifically for technology. It's not generic, and I decided to bypass the step that Sam is interested in. It's how do you call it, Sam, when you have to approve, like merge request widget or something?
Say that one more time.
The step, like I think you used the term for the step that you wanted to have in policy management, that it's about reviewing, like merge request or something. So yeah, I just passed that, I guess. I don't remember the terms that them used.
Yeah, I mean, I guess just to clarify, like I really view this discussion, I know we're doing one thing for the short term, but I really felt like it would be useful for us to define the architecture, for the end state, and in the long term end state, I listed a bunch of requirements up top we would want to have met. We're going to want, to take the policy management UI that you're working on now, Arthur, and even though right now we're starting with Cilium policies, we're going to want to add in lots of other kinds of policies into that in the future and make it accessible and, address this list of requirements here in that policy management experience. And so, what does that end state architecture look like? Understanding that, we're not there today and we aren't likely to get there, in the next iteration. But if we can have a vision for where we're headed, then, we have something to work towards.
Yeah, got it. Yeah, to get back to this, I guess, point being discussed right now by the store, I don't know. I see the benefits of doing either way, and the only thing that is my mind going with YAML files just is an indirect way of doing things right now, and will make us do more to deploy policy, and automatically it comes with the dependency of CI pipeline most likely, which might be a good thing in some cases, but judging by the discussions that we had in the past cycles about removing certain dependencies and CI jobs were included in this list, I don't know if we want to go with YAML. So yeah, it's a good discussion, and I see pros and cons for database in YAML files.
So one thing that I wanted to point out, and the reason that Seth and I are on this meeting, is that we are going in a maybe similar direction in Dast, because we have these profiles that we're going to be building up that eventually we want to move to the group level. And the problem with the group level is that there is no repo, there is no pipeline. It's all database basically. And especially when you start looking at who will have permissions for these changing some of these policies or in our case, profiles, sometimes you get up into pretty high levels of either security or engineering management. And if you have them in a YAML file in a repo, if the only people that can approve MRs on that repo are your upper level management, you could get into even more issues with trying to have maintainers on that repo actually maintain the repo, because you wouldn't have enough maintainers to cover all of the actual development that's going on, just so you could lock down these policies.
Is there a technical advantage in starting off with YAML and then moving to database when we're ready to go to the group level, or are we just wasting time and might as well look at DB directly?
Again, my opinion is that YAML file, it's just additional steps that we have to take care of, and there is no, like, Kubernetes itself does not have a necessity for YAML. YAML is just format that is conveniently used right now for the Kubernetes, but under the hood it stores typed information in etcd, right? So I would say strong necessity to do Kubernetes to go with YAML files, sorry. And I don't see it right now. That's probably why I don't see much value in that. And on top of that, the way we deploy in policy right now, and we can deploy policy right now because we have direct access to the cluster, it makes YAML file even more redundant because we can go and just install any information that user will type to us into the cluster, bypassing YAML completely. So that's just what I see right now.
So Philippe and Alan, Philippe, maybe you had a really good point on some of the requirements that we get for free using YAML files.
We've been there, believe me, that's why.
We have been there. Is there anything else that balances it out? Because it sounds like we couldn't achieve what we want to do, the group level and even instance level using YAML files. Or could we?
So first of all, I'm not sure that we're going to define any network policy at the group level. That doesn't mean anything to me. That would be super weird, super dangerous. And secondly, if we don't use a file, if we put things in the DB, meaning we need a UI for that, we're going to reinvent the wheel because we need to figure out who is going to be able to do what, who did what, so we need traceability. There is no way to audit that. We have that problem, for example, with the dismissers. We don't know exactly. Now we have that because we have the audit trace, but it's a lot of redundancy with everything that we already have at the repo level. If we have code owners files, we could require the approval of some people in the team to approve any change in this network policy file, for example, which is something that we don't have in the UI that we would need to redevelop again, probably from scratch. I don't know if we have any components for that. So that's the easy way to me. There are so many other advantages of using YAML files versus the DB, but I will update maybe the comment that. Who was the other one? Zamir, maybe?
Yeah, for me, I agree with Philippe on the YAML file. I think it makes things a little bit easier on the features that we have already available. The concern for me on that is that I think it's going to take a little bit of effort for us to be able to make a single, let's say if we go for a table, it's going to be a little bit hard to have a table that's going to cover most of the different policies that we are going to work with. I know that that's the goal, to have a single place to have the policies over there. Right now, for example, if we compare the network policy with the AppArmor policies, they are very different. And I'm not even sure like how that's going to scale up on the UI. As soon as we put on the UI, we start adding lots of complexities. So that's my thinking right now. I'm a little bit stuck on the AppArmor policy at the moment, so I'm having a hard time to see that. A little bit beyond that.
I can clarify a bit about that, because we have access to JSON-B on Postgres level. This is one of the options for us to serialize data generically, but at the same time, you have to think all the time that all the policies that Kubernetes defines, they're statically typed. They have a schema by itself, and when Kubernetes deserializes policies from your YAML, it's actually does that against the schema. So we definitely can put this information into database, and even generically using polymorphic relationships, for example.
So just real quick, if we're not deviating too much from where the conversation's gone, Philippe, I wanted to come back to your comment about network policies at the group level and just clarify that use case a little bit. Really, the use case there at the instance and group and project levels, it still is going to be applied at the environment level because that's where network policies get applied. But if you're able to manage policies at the group level, that will save you the need to duplicate policies across all of your different environments in the case that you have one policy that you want to apply to everything inside of a group. So the thinking is you would create that at the group level. That would just flow down and be a required policy that's included for all environments in all projects that belong to that group. So it's not, there is no environment at the group level, but you could still create a policy at the group level and have that flow down.
So I'm hearing includes there. That's something that we could do also with the YAML files, I guess. So I added another example. If you have a change in the network policy, like you don't want an application to hit a certain pod directly, and that requires to update the application because the traffic is going through another pod or something. How do you sync that if you don't have a file? That means you will have to change your application and click on the UI deploy button at the same time, hoping that you won't have an overlap between the two. That's not going to work really well. See what I mean?
I think the process is slightly different for all Kubernetes policies because they're deterministic in terms of how they apply, and they work on names based on combination of namespace and label. You can actually put predictable policy ahead of time before deploying the application if you know the label and namespace, and because you're in control of the label and namespace, you definitely can put any kind of Kubernetes policy, and I'm talking pod security policy and network policy ahead of time.
So one of the questions, and I think downsides that I see to the YAML file is I don't know how you query a bunch of projects. So if you're trying to enforce a particular policy and you want to say, hey, which of my projects are in compliance with this? If it's in a YAML file, that is a massive undertaking to try to go into each project, read the repo, grab the YAML file, parse it, as opposed to a database query, which makes something like that or enforcing policies significantly easier.
Yeah, I just was thinking about that when Zamir was talking about database and just lost the track of it. Thanks for bringing it in. Yeah, I think it's really valid. It's definitely, if we will be doing more advanced operations on policies, like let's say copy or templating or something like that, going back and check YAML files will be almost impossible in certain situations. It's just too much. It will slow down the UI, right? It's not going to be real time. And that's the advantage of having a database that we can actually do interesting things in real time with our interfaces.
How about the UI?
When I put on the,
sorry, you go.
It's just that when I did the +1, I wrote exactly like that. I said that if we are not needing to query within the policies, then yeah, the ML file would cover that. But if we are looking towards having a monitoring of each field for the policies, then the ML file would be harder for sure on that.
So one of the other, I think, benefits that we were talking about for a YAML file is just the auditability of a YAML file, right? It's in your repo. You can see who changed it. And if you put it in a web interface, we have to build that auditability in manually by throwing it into the audit tabs. The one thing that I will say is not everything in GitLab is audited. And we may think that this needs to be audited, but what I will say is today, not everything is audited. So I don't know if that has to be a requirement. So for example, if I go into the container registry today and hit delete on a container, that doesn't get audited anywhere. If I go into settings of my repo or any of my projects and change any of those settings, those don't all get audited. So if we were to move things to a web interface where things can be changed if you have permission, but those aren't audit tracks, it still follows some of the design patterns of GitLab. I'm not saying that's the best thing to do. I think every action in every interface in GitLab should probably be audited, but we would not be the only web interface that doesn't have full auditing and tracking on change.
Basically, we don't get it for free,
Yeah,
is what you're
so-
saying.
Right.
Sure, but auditing would definitely be a requirement for these actions because you're talking about actually changing security policies. That's had in our competitor products as well. So we would, if we didn't get it for free, we would have to build it. We would have to add in that auditing in some way.
Yeah, and there's hooks to add it into those tabs. It's not pretty, but there's infrastructure for doing it.
Right, and we are looking at doing that with Dast as well at some point when we get to the UI configuration area. So we've got some issues or an issue written up for it, but I don't know if you all will get there first or not. So I don't know if we'll be of much help.
Yeah, I mean, the end state for auditing is more than just auditing it. Ideally, you would actually be able to go in and see the version history for the policy, see who changed what, and optionally revert to a previous version. So you could go and say, okay, at 11 a.m., Sam White went and made a change that crashed the production site. I'm going to click revert so that I know I'm going back to the version before that, which was a known good approved version, and now everything's going to work again, would be the use case.
Right, and that's a level of detail that I have not gone into on Dast because I don't feel like it's necessary for the initial rollout of what our auditing would need to look like. It sounds like a great feature, but I can see how that would be much more important for your area. So that's a good point.
The other thing, and we haven't kind of gotten into this yet, is there may be some hybrid solutions, right? So that there's a potential that, I don't know, I'm just kind of thinking through this. It goes into the database, but a version gets stored as a YAML, or maybe, you do the merge request, and then when it gets merged into the master branch, it gets parsed and thrown into the database, things of that sort. So there may be kind of some combinations that could get around some of these shortcomings one way or the other.
Yeah, and do we want to talk a little bit about UI? Because Zamir raised it, and I was a bit curious. How do people see this happening on the UI with YAML versus DB? Any differences? Anyone?
So I'm anticipating that we'll design the user experience, regardless of this engineering decision on the back end. I mean, currently what I've been discussing with Andy is a plan to have both easy to use rules editor UI that I previewed at an earlier meeting, side by side with a text-based editor to edit the policy directly. Now, whether that policy is a YAML file that gets committed to the repo, or whether that's a policy that's being pushed directly into, say, Cilium, again, I think it could go either way on the back end and still accommodate the UI. But the idea is to be able to edit either the rule directly or with the UI widget, and those two would be able to be synchronized together. That's a long-term vision.
Cool. So we could, with YAML files, we could leverage the web editor as well, the web IDE. Especially we had some schema validation there. And with what Seth was saying, that could have a hybrid solution later. All right, cool.
The other thing that might be important to think about too is if we had a web interface, presumably to make that web interface work, we'd have API endpoints. So customers could actually call those API endpoints and say add rule, delete rule, whatever. And that might be one way of interfacing. If you go down the YAML route, the way customers would really interface is like, hey, here's my entire file, you know, take it or leave it, and they have to send everything over. So they can't do things programmatically quite the same way as if we had a web interface.
Yeah, this discussion about side by side, it happened multiple times, but and I heard that other groups were having the similar discussion, specifically configure in relation to cluster management, but it never actually went through for some reason in all those instances. So I guess the downside of side by side is just kind of duplication of work. We already provide the bottom line, like let's say user-friendly UI. Should we spend more time in catering like smaller group? So yeah, I'm not sure about side by side will be always a good solution. While I would prefer probably to have a policy editor myself, I see that UI friendly version will be a better baseline, right?
The thing is that I'm hearing from Seth that reminds me of the AppArmor policy, is that AppArmor policy is not going to be like a Kubernetes policy. It's going to be basically just a file format C file. And that would be like, it would allow, if the user could just edit that in UI, understand that how that would be beneficial for the user instead of just clicking the checkbox. You cannot do that with checkbox, for example. So then I see what Seth's coming from with that perspective. But again, yeah, having a side-by-side and a user-friendly kind of editable option, it would be maybe a little bit of duplication for sure.
Also, I remember one of the requirements was that at some point we're going to export those policies, and you'll be able to import them into different projects or group. So that's one pro for YAML file, because then it will be easily exportable, and then you can import them and you can share them using some kind of like shared space and the documentation. Here are like examples of the policies that you could use. So that's one thing as well.
I think Sam is doing a table in the document. That's why.
It's good. Some
Yeah,
pros
I'm
and
just trying
cons.
to summarize. I'm just trying to summarize up the conversation above as best I can. I mean, I get the sense that we've listed a lot of different pros and cons of the two options, and I'm just attempting to summarize.
My proposition will be is to investigate YAML files probably as a first attempt, and try how they fit in, but I suspect the database will be slightly more convenient straight away. So maybe we don't even need kind of to do a decision right now, right? It's not hard to experiment a bit, but I definitely feel like database will be a bit easier first step for us right now.
Yeah, so that's what I was trying to get to before. Do we need to have all this discussion? Can we just start with YAML, and once we hit a brick wall, we'll go in and switch gears to DB, or is that gonna send us in a completely different direction? Because it feels like we're gonna get on something that we can play with and experiment sooner, because of the reasons that Philippe listed up there.
Yeah, I believe we can start with YAML files. Anyway, like we don't want to start with UI, we want to start with something on the backend side. So that's one approach. The second one would be just to build some REST or GraphQL APIs for it. So we can do it with YAML files, and then then see if we can deliver it or not, and then look for other options.
So with the YAML files, is there still a web interface for editing, or there's no web interface? So there is, and then so you make your change in the web interface, and then it would require the merge request process.
I would guess I will try to answer from my understanding. Sam might correct me. So the idea is to have UI, but because they will be sitting in a repository, as I understand right now, right? Like we could probably work with that, and by that I mean there is already support in WebID at least, so we can expand WebID, for example, to provide a bit feedback or maybe some guidance inside the web interface ID, right? That's one of the options we discussed previously. So there are definitely benefits of YAML file because it's a part of repository and gives some additional tools, access to some additional tools that we are not using as much, but I think we want, and I'm talking about WebID. Yeah, there are opportunities of that, I feel like.
Yeah, my idea initially was to have something similar to cluster management project. So you have a repository where you keep those YAML files, and then you can select for your cluster that you would like to use this policy management project from this project, and you could set that on project, group, and instance level as well. And then you can modify it using WebID, and of course we can extend it. So that was just do something similar as we're doing already for the management project.
The one thing that, thanks for bringing management project, the one thing that is really a huge pain with management project is figuring out to which cluster your policies are applying to. Because of that, you have to go and select management project. But then when you're applying policies, there is whole like, because when you set up a cluster, you need to set up a scope of it. And there are multiple scopes. And because of that, you can have multiple clusters applying to the same policy at the same time. And the resolution process was historically really bad. And people got confused a lot of time. So this thing have to be really well thought out, because we can mess up and install policy into clusters that user does not as expect to install it. And yeah, having one repository managing multiple clusters is a possibility, and it's probably the way we want it to go. But at the same time, I think putting policies inside the project repository will be a bit bad idea, because it will give us a better understanding of when and what to deploy to. So yeah, sorry for rambling, but what I'm trying to say is that a relationship between cluster, application project, and management project is really complex, and it's not one-to-one, it's many-to-many essentially, and orchestration groups struggled with this specific issue for a long time.
So if I'm hearing correctly, when you have the policies in the repository, they still have to get applied to the cluster, which means we still don't have the full auditing that we're really trying to get to, right? Because you can make a policy change, you do all these things, you submit the YAML file, but it never gets applied. So you don't really know when those policies are into effect, which is part of what we're trying to solve.
To clarify, because Alan was specifically mentioning management policy as a management project as a direction. So management project is a separate repository of your application where you store a specific YAML file, and the specific YAML file is used to provision your cluster. To link those together, you go into the cluster settings and you select the repository that you want to manage this cluster. And because of that, multiple clusters can select the same project, and then your statement is absolutely correct, because changing this management, specifically repository, doesn't like in many cases represent the state of application. But another option, and orchestration is kind of doing both things at the same time, so we can investigate both too, is to store the YAML file inside the project repository, specifically not some external repository, but the project that you're working on. And this actually simplifies certain things a bit, because project only has usually one-to-one connection to the cluster it's being deployed to. It depends on environment. So in this situation, yeah, there is a better auditing capabilities and a bit easier to figure out where to put policies. But the downside is it's really hard to support, like we discussed, instance level policies, group level policies, etc. It's a bit hard to imagine how would those policies apply on the project level, right? If all policies just inside the repository. So yeah, I don't really have a good answer. It's something that has to be investigated.
Is this something that we need to spike out? I mean, the whole cluster management project, I think already needs shouldn't really stop us going from either way, because I think it's already a problem that needs to be solved. It's tripped me up big time, and as Artur was saying, it's already got some problems in there in parsing and understanding how you're going to apply that. Maybe an outcome of this is somebody picks up an issue to go play with it and bring some ideas to the table. What does everyone think? A couple nodding heads.
So I don't know if that can be tied in. We already have an issue out there. I think Philippe is assigned to it to look at how we can remove our dependency on auto DevOps. I wonder if we can just extend that one to include the spike that you're talking about, or if you want to have a separate issue.
It might be a little bit different, but I would let the person picking it up decide whether. Do you have an opinion, Alan? If we can, if it's a good idea to do these both at the same time, the BYO cluster and investigation how to store the policies.
I have a question kind of related to this. I know that Artur worked already with the network policy, and I'm working with the pod security policy and the app armor policies. Are we going to halt them a little bit before we make these decisions, or we are going to move forward kind of a little bit ad hoc on them and then putting them together later on?
Good question. By default, what would you do?
But by default, I would just implement them separately for now, just to have the feature. But I'm not sure, maybe if this discussion go more mature quickly, it's affecting other teams as well. Maybe we should halt and make a decision that's going to benefit most of us, at least.
I believe we're doing something similar with Falco, that you need to have some way to provide those. You don't have policies, but you do have like configurations like alerts or rules and macros, and we allow users to modify it using like just Falco schema. And I believe this will be the same. Like we cannot force users to use the pod security. I mean the policy management. They should be still able to use the like original application if they want, if they have their own already tested policies for, I don't know, for Cilium or for pod security policy. They should be able to use it. That's at least my opinion.
Yeah, I guess that goes down to item number 4 there of how do we keep everything in sync, where, you know, if we've got something in the database and or something in a YAML file, and then you also have a configuration in a cluster that can be changed, how do you reconcile, because they could be editing things anywhere, and you need those changes to be replicated to all the places where the policy is stored. I don't have an answer. I don't know. I mean, my best, if I put my engineering hat on, I would say my best thought is to create some sort of hash of the policy and, have some sort of precedence, for one that overwrites the other when you see a diff between the two, or perhaps you just create a new one. You'd have to have some sort of rules there, but I don't pretend to have any sort of hard answers there.
I have a question then. Seth, would you be able to bring up user case for the situations that you're most concerned with? So then we can keep in mind when we are developing from our side.
Yeah, I've got a couple issues that I've opened on how to do this. And one of the approaches we did was like a hybrid or a fallback solution. But yeah, I can share that issue. Let me see if I can dig that up.
Okay.
And then we can add some of the other additional use cases.
Okay, thank you.
One of the things about the hybrid that may be worth looking into is if you look at GitLab CI YAML today, there's actually points in time where that gets parsed into the database. And I don't know exactly when that is, whether it's on a commit, but you can look and you can find parts of your CI YAML file in the database. And so that might be similar to like what we were talking about before.
Um, 12-minute check. Are we going the right direction here? Do we need to change topics, or are we happy to keep going and see what else we managed to cover?
I'm comfortable with where we're going here. Even if we don't get through everything in this 1 hour, that's okay. We can schedule more time later or continue the discussion. I would be surprised if we actually resolved everything here in this meeting. So I just wanted to get the conversation started. I'm sure this is one of many to come.
Yeah, we're talking about keeping everything in sync, and I believe like synchronization is actually one of the biggest engineering problems always, all the time. So what I would say is let's keep for now the policy that you have created using this policy management feature as a desired state, and that you'd like your cluster to use them. And if someone edits their cluster manually or doing something else, at least in the first release, it shouldn't be reflected in the policy management UI. In the same way as when you have those YAML files for Kubernetes and you edit them and you store them in some repository, and when you edit like your pod or your daemon set or deployment directly on the cluster, those YAML files are not getting updated. Of course, under the hood, it's on Kubernetes, it's still a YAML file or something like that that's being updated, but you don't get that back to your repository where you originally have your state for a cluster, for desired state. So I would keep that as the first release, definitely something like that, because that will be hard. We will have so many tools, and doing like synchronizations from them to our policy management format will be definitely something very challenging.
Thanks for bringing that in. We actually had this discussion with Sam on network policies, and we actually decided to go on the first release in a completely different way and working directly with cluster for the same reason, because we're in security field, and it's nice to store our policies somewhere and assume that those policies are applied, but all the directions we investigated today, and I mean database in YAML, they have a critical flaw is that I can just go and remove your policy, and you will not be able to stop me in any way. There is no way to enforce it on the cluster level. So what we are doing with network policies right now is actually working directly with the cluster, because Kubernetes itself is can store metadata in etcd, and it has a schema. So we're essentially reading policies from the cluster and updating policies directly in the cluster. And yeah, the value of that is that if someone will go and change from the command line, the policy updates, deletes, or anything, it will be reflected straight away in the UI, and it will be noticeable. It doesn't give like alerting in any way, so you have to go and see it for yourself, but at least it represents the actual state of the cluster. With the database and YAML, we would need something that enforcing constantly the state of it. One of the directions that we that is our orchestration team is going right now is introducing a GitLab agent to the cluster, so we could leverage that ongoing work for synchronizing. But until that is done, we probably will be hoping that our UI is representing the state of the cluster. There is no other way.
Yeah, doesn't using storing directly in the cluster the configuration complicate approval flows? Because you wouldn't have a place to hold that while it gets reviewed and approved.
It depends. It still can be approved. Like someone creates a policy, it does not necessarily have to be applied straight away, right? We can figure out it can be a temporary database storage for the merge request specifically, let's say. I don't know the capabilities we have up there, but maybe there is a way to supply metadata, like let's say it can be in description straight away, and when you apply the policy, it can be parsed from the description of
cool. So have some temporary storage, but don't make it a canonical source of truth.
Yeah, I have not thought much about the specific flow because we don't have it and we did not discuss it before. But I see some ways to implement two-step approval, even not having any kind of database, because we can just use any of those, like properly database can be easily used as a temporary storage.
5 minutes. Do we want to try and summarize some actions that we going to follow up, or just see what the next steps are? I've only written down one action in the document, and I think Seth has already done it, so yay. So given that we have some things in progress that will need some storage, how about we in Defend at least make it clear and transparent how we're planning to address those? If we're not going to change direction, I think the least we can do is put it up somewhere, and so Seth and the rest of the CQ team at least can have a look and call out any major issues. Is that okay, Alan and Samir? Is that something easy to do and that could go in an issue somewhere that we can share?
And we can run
that makes sense to me.
Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, Samir.
We can run that solution against the use case that Seth is going to share with us, and see if we can preempt some cases that we didn't consider, basically.
Cool. And then I think
that
another
makes sense to me. we maybe, sorry, I was just gonna say, maybe, you're right. It probably would be worth having a separate issue for this, a research spike or whatever we want to call it, to put together an engineering proposal for the long-term architecture for policies. I just, I don't want this to be confused with what Arthur's doing in the short term, because we do want to continue to operate iteratively and get things out. And, I don't want this to hold up getting an initial policy management UI out, but at the same time, we also need to think about the long run and have a vision for how it's going to work in the end.
Yeah, and it might end up helping the auto DevOps issue that Philippe already has against him. But yeah, I think we should treat this separately. Cool. Would you want to run that research on the next iteration, Sam, or would you prefer to get it going in flight as soon as a person comes up available?
Um,
Don't have to answer me now. That's okay.
I'm
We'll
not
create the issue
sure.
first.
I'm going to try to push it off to the next iteration because I hate adding things this late in the game. But,
Yeah.
you know, at the same time, I think we're going to need to have some plans there relatively soon. So I'll figure out how to prioritize that. I don't know right now.
Thank you.
And we'll be moving forward with this on our side as well. And granted, there might be differences in use cases, and maybe what we are doing won't answer your use cases and vice versa. But I think that it would be good for us to keep in sync as we go through these processes.
Yeah, I agree with that. I guess since it's quiet and, you know, we've got a little bit of extra time, I do want to just call out one, you know, note or requirement that we haven't really discussed much. And if you look at the top of the document in the use cases, I gave a couple of examples of policies that might potentially span multiple technologies. So, you know, I understand that starts to become a little bit complex, but potentially we would want to let users create policies. You know, really a policy is a big if this, then that statement, right? If you've ever used if this, then that, you know, that's sort of what we're going for here, you know, where you can have multiple rules chained together with ands and ors, multiple actions that are chained together with ands. And those actions and those rules may not all come from the same technology, right? So it may be the case that I see an action in, you know, something occurs in mod security, and I then want to have, you know, Falco Sidekick take an action to send a Slack message, or, you know, even the rule part of that may be a little bit mixed between the technologies that we're using under the hood, especially on container host protection. We have a pretty large stack of technologies there. So it's going to be pretty easy for things to cross over. You know, so whatever we do on the back end, we want to take that into consideration. Of course, where Arthur's starting right now, it's simple because it's just Cilium, you know, and that's it, you know, which is a great place to start. But in the end, we want to have something that allows for spanning across technologies in a little bit simpler fashion.
That definitely implicates the querying issue that Zamir and Seth both raised. And we're at time.
All right. Well, thanks. I will create that issue, and we'll get that appropriately prioritized. And I'm sure we're going to have more discussions in the future. I'll discuss prioritization with Tiago and figure out when and where to discuss next.
Thanks for organizing.
All right. Thanks, everyone.